The diplomatic facade. The ultimatum arrives. Ambassador Marcus Webb straightened his tie as the massive holographic display materialized in the United Nations Assembly Hall. The image of Admiral Kex Thull, Supreme Commander of the Hegemony Third Fleet, towered over the gathered human delegates like a metallic scarecrow. His insectoid features twitched with barely contained arrogance as he delivered what he clearly believed would be humanity's final diplomatic exchange. The galactic hegemony has observed your species for exactly one standard cycle. Kex Thull's translator rendered his clicking speech into cold, mechanical English. Your technological advancement, while primitive, shows potential for useful labor. Your resistance capabilities appear minimal based on our scans of your military installations. Webb kept his expression neutral, even as Captain Linda Torres shifted uncomfortably beside him. Torres commanded the UN Security Council's elite protection detail, and her hand hadn't moved far from her sidearm since the transmission began. Webb could practically feel the tension radiating from her compact frame. Therefore, the Admiral continued, the hegemony offers you terms of incorporation. Surrender your military assets, dissolve your governing bodies, and submit to hegemony oversight. In exchange, your species will be relocated to agricultural worlds where you can serve a productive purpose. The calculated response. The assembly hall fell silent. 200 delegates from every nation on Earth waited for Webb's response. The ambassador had spent 30 years navigating the treacherous waters of international diplomacy, but nothing had prepared him for negotiating humanity's surrender to an alien empire. Admiral Kex Thull, Webb began, his voice carrying the practiced calm of countless high-stakes negotiations, we appreciate the hegemony's generous offer. However, such a momentous decision requires careful consideration by our global leadership. The alien's mandibles clicked in what his briefing material suggested was amusement. You speak as if you have choices, Ambassador. Our fleet consists of 47 dreadnoughts, each capable of sterilizing your entire planet. Your largest warship masses less than one of our escort frigates. Webb nodded thoughtfully. Of course, Admiral. Your military superiority is evident. We simply request time to organize the transition. Surely the hegemony prefers orderly compliance to chaotic collapse? Torres caught the subtle emphasis on orderly and transition. These weren't random diplomatic words, they were code phrases that would activate protocols across every human government and military installation on Earth. The seemingly peaceful surrender. Very well, Kex Thull's image flickered as he consulted something off-screen. You have 72 of your rotations to prepare for integration. Any hostile action will result in immediate planetary bombardment. Any attempt to flee your system will be met with annihilation. Understood completely, Admiral, Webb replied. We'll begin preparations immediately. The transmission ended, leaving the assembly hall in stunned silence. Then the shouting began. Delegates from military nations demanded immediate retaliation. Representatives from smaller countries called for evacuation plans. The Brazilian ambassador was already on his phone, probably arranging to move his family to the deepest bunker available. Webb raised his hand, and gradually, the chaos subsided. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 72 hours to save our species. Captain Torres, please initiate Protocol 7 across all networks. Torres nodded grimly and spoke into her encrypted communicator. Lighthouse to all stations. The shepherd is calling his flock. Repeat, the shepherd is calling his flock. The hidden preparations. As delegates filed out of the assembly hall, many weeping openly, Webb remained at the podium. Torres approached him, her expression troubled. Sir, with respect, how exactly are we supposed to save humanity by surrendering? She asked. Webb's diplomatic mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Captain, do you know what separated humans from every other species on Earth? Sir. We didn't just survive. We thrived. We eliminated or domesticated every threat on our planet. We turned wolves into pets, bacteria into medicine, and the atom into a weapon. We did this not through superior strength, but through superior adaptability. Torres frowned. I'm not following, sir. Webb walked to the window overlooking the Hudson River, where normal people were going about their normal lives, unaware that their world had just been conquered. The hegemony sees us as primitive farmers, Captain. They expect us to roll over and accept slavery because their ships are bigger than ours. Aren't they? Oh, absolutely. In a straight military confrontation, we'd be extinct within hours. Webb turned back to Torres, and she saw something in his eyes that made her step back instinctively. But here's what Admiral Kexthul doesn't understand about humans, Captain. We've never fought fair. Not once in our entire evolutionary history. The ancient instincts stir. Across the globe, encrypted messages spread through military networks, scientific institutions, and government agencies. The content was simple: humanity had been conquered, but the war was just beginning. In research facilities from Geneva to Tokyo, scientists began uploading decades of behavioral and biological data to hidden servers. Military commanders quietly repositioned assets and activated sleeper protocols that had been theoretical exercises just hours before. Webb watched the city below and smiled. The hegemony had made a critical error. They'd studied human technology and human military capabilities, but they hadn't studied human nature. They saw a species that had achieved spaceflight and assumed they understood what humans were capable of. Captain, Webb said quietly, what do you think happens when you corner a species that spent millions of years learning to hunt in packs? Torres felt a chill run down her spine. Sir? The hegemony is about to learn why humans are the only species on Earth that actively hunts other predators for sport. Webb's diplomatic smile returned, but it no longer looked friendly. They think they've conquered us, Captain. In 72 hours, they're going to learn the difference between submission and setting a trap. The first phase of humanity's most dangerous gambit had begun, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming. The gentle resistance. The subtle sabotage begins. Colonel James Mitchell crouched behind the twisted remains of what had once been a telecommunications tower, watching the hegemony ground forces establish their forward operating base. 3 days had passed since humanity's official surrender, and the aliens had wasted no time in landing their occupation forces across major population centers. Status report, Lieutenant, Mitchell whispered into his throat mic. Lieutenant Rebecca Stone's voice crackled back through the encrypted channel. Sector 7 is experiencing another mysterious power grid failure, sir. That's the third one this week. The hegemony engineers are baffled. Mitchell allowed himself a grim smile. The power failures weren't mysterious at all. They were the result of carefully placed microcharges that had been installed by utility workers across 17 major cities. Each explosion was small enough to appear accidental, but collectively they were crippling the aliens' attempts to establish stable communication networks. And the supply convoys? Convoy Delta 7 suffered complete navigation system failure 20 kilometers outside Denver. They're currently stuck in a canyon, and their atmospheric processors are experiencing what their technicians are calling unexplained bacterial contamination. The frustrated occupation. General Vexkar stood before the holographic display in his command center, his 4 arms gesturing frantically as he tried to explain the situation to his superiors. The hegemony had conquered 47 worlds, but none had presented such persistent technical difficulties. The humans claim complete cooperation, Vexkar reported, his translated voice carrying notes of confusion. They've surrendered all military assets as ordered. They've disbanded their governments. They've even provided detailed maps of their infrastructure. Then why, Admiral Kexthul's image demanded, are our operations experiencing a 37% efficiency reduction? Vexkar's mandibles clicked nervously. The planet appears to be fighting back, sir. Not the humans themselves, but their technology. Equipment fails at precisely the worst moments. Navigation systems malfunction in remote areas. Even their basic utilities seem designed to resist our modifications. Designed by whom? Our scans indicated primitive technology. That's what troubles me, Admiral. The failures are too sophisticated to be accidental, but too subtle to be obvious sabotage. It's as if the entire planet has been prepared for this scenario. The prisoner's disturbing calm. Meanwhile, in the detention facility outside Chicago, Mitchell observed something that made his blood run cold for entirely different reasons. The human prisoners weren't behaving like any conquered population he'd ever studied. Through his binoculars, he watched as groups of captured civilians sat in perfect formation, their eyes following the movements of their hegemony guards with an intensity that was almost predatory. They weren't showing fear or desperation. They were watching. Learning. Taking notes. "Colonel," Stone's voice came through his earpiece, "you need to see this." Mitchell low-crawled to her position and accepted the tablet she offered. The screen showed intercepted communications between hegemony guard units. "Prisoner behavior increasingly unsettling," Stone read aloud. "Subjects display no emotional distress despite confinement. Instead, they appear to be studying our patrol patterns, equipment specifications, and behavioral responses. Request psychological evaluation of human stress responses." Mitchell frowned. "They're not breaking down. They're adapting." "Sir, there's more. Look at this report from the Denver facility. The watchers become the watched." The next transmission made Mitchell's tactical mind race with possibilities. A hegemony psychologist was reporting that human prisoners were demonstrating unprecedented pattern recognition capabilities and disturbingly efficient information sharing despite communication restrictions. "The subjects have developed a complex nonverbal communication system," the report continued. "They appear to be cataloging our personnel, equipment, and standard operating procedures. When questioned, they claim to be just trying to be helpful." Stone looked up from the tablet. "Colonel, they're not just surviving captivity. They're turning it into a reconnaissance operation." Mitchell felt a surge of pride mixed with ancient recognition. This was what humans did. They adapted. They observed. They learned their enemies' weaknesses while appearing completely harmless. "Lieutenant, patch me through to command. I need to speak with General Blake immediately." The network awakens. Across the globe, similar reports were filtering through hidden communication networks. In Tokyo, captured scientists were offering to help their guards understand human technology, while secretly documenting every piece of alien equipment they encountered. In London, prisoners were volunteering for work details that gave them access to hegemony supply chains. In São Paulo, a group of captured civilians had convinced their guards to let them organize recreational activities, which had somehow evolved into detailed discussions about hegemony military doctrine. The aliens saw cooperation. The humans saw intelligence gathering. Colonel Mitchell finally reached General Blake through the encrypted quantum channel. "Sir, we need to escalate to Phase 2 immediately." "Negative, Colonel. We're still in the information gathering stage." "Sir, with respect, our people aren't just gathering information. They're exhibiting behaviors that are making the hegemony nervous. If we don't move soon, they might realize what's happening." Blake's voice carried a note of cold satisfaction. "Colonel, do you know what the hegemony's biggest mistake was?" "Sir?" "They assumed that conquering us would make us predictable. They've never encountered a species that treats defeat as a learning opportunity. The trap deepens." Mitchell watched as another hegemony patrol passed by his position, their movements already becoming routine and predictable. In just 3 days, his team had catalogued their entire tactical doctrine, identified weaknesses in their equipment, and established a communication network that spanned 3 continents. "Colonel," Stone whispered, "incoming transmission from the Detroit sector." The message was brief but chilling. "Human prisoners have begun asking detailed questions about hegemony homeworld culture. They claim to be fascinated by our civilization and want to learn how to be better subjects. Our cultural liaisons are pleased with their enthusiasm. Mitchell closed his eyes and felt something ancient stirring in his chest. The hegemony had made the same mistake that countless predators had made on Earth throughout history. They'd assumed that because humans appeared weak and cooperative, they actually were weak and cooperative. Lieutenant, initiate Phase 2 protocols. It's time to show them what happens when humans stop playing nice. Sir, are you sure? Once we cross that line. The line was crossed the moment they decided to enslave us, Lieutenant. Now they're about to learn why no species on Earth has ever successfully domesticated humans. As night fell over the occupied territories, millions of humans began to remember something their civilization had spent centuries trying to forget. They remembered what it felt like to be hunters. The predator's patience. The psychological profile. Dr. Nathan Cross sat in the sterile white room, his hands folded calmly in his lap as High Inquisitor Zelmoth reviewed the psychological evaluation for the third time. The alien's compound eyes reflected the data screens as he tried to make sense of the human behavioral patterns his teams had been documenting. Dr. Cross, Zelmoth's translator rendered his chittering speech into precise English. Your species continues to confound our behavioral analysts. You have been conquered, your military destroyed, your governments dissolved. Yet our stress indicators show remarkably low levels of trauma response. Cross smiled gently, the expression of a man discussing the weather rather than the enslavement of his species. High Inquisitor, I think you're misunderstanding human psychology. We're actually quite adaptable. We find that cooperation generally leads to better outcomes than resistance. Cooperation, Zelmoth repeated slowly. Yet our efficiency reports show continued technical failures across all occupied territories. Equipment malfunctions, communication breakdowns, supply chain disruptions. Are these not acts of sabotage? I'm afraid you'll have to ask the engineers about that, Cross replied, his voice carrying just the right note of helpful concern. Though I suspect it might be environmental factors. Earth's atmosphere can be quite corrosive to certain metallic compounds. The unsettling observations. In the monitoring room adjacent to the interrogation chamber, Sergeant Maria Santos crouched in the ventilation shaft, recording every word through her directional microphone. Her Special Forces training had prepared her for deep reconnaissance, but nothing had prepared her for what she was witnessing. Dr. Cross wasn't just being interrogated. He was conducting his own psychological evaluation of the hegemony interrogation techniques. Every question Zelmoth asked was being analyzed, catalogued, and turned into data about alien behavioral patterns. Dr. Cross, Zelmoth continued, our scans indicate that human prisoners are spending significant time observing our personnel. They claim to be curious about our culture, but the behavior patterns suggest systematic intelligence gathering. Cross nodded enthusiastically. Oh, we're definitely curious. You have to understand, High Inquisitor, humans are naturally social creatures. We're fascinated by different forms of social organization. It's just our nature to try to understand how other societies function. What Zelmoth couldn't see was the micro-expressions that Santos was trained to recognize. Cross's pupils dilated slightly when the alien mentioned specific security protocols. His breathing patterns changed when certain facility layouts were discussed. He was absorbing and categorizing every piece of information while maintaining the perfect facade of helpful cooperation. The hunters reveal themselves. 3,000 kilometers away, in the ruins of what had once been Berlin, Colonel Mitchell's team was putting Cross's psychological insights to use. The behavioral profiles that human prisoners had been compiling were paying dividends in ways the hegemony couldn't have imagined. Target acquired, whispered Staff Sergeant Rodriguez through the comm, Hegemony Patrol, for units, following pattern Delta 7 exactly as predicted. Mitchell watched through his night vision scope as the alien soldiers moved through the rubble-strewn streets. Their movement patterns had become as predictable as clockwork after just 1 week of observation. They followed the same routes, maintained the same intervals, and responded to threats in exactly the same way every time. Remember, Mitchell subvocalized into his throat mic, "We're not trying to kill them. We're trying to educate them." The first alien never saw the snare trap that caught his ankle. As he went down, his weapon flying from his grasp, his three companions immediately moved to defensive positions, exactly as human observers had documented they would. This allowed Santos, who had somehow materialized behind them like a ghost, to disable their communications equipment with surgical precision. The lesson begins. Within 30 seconds, 4 heavily armed hegemony soldiers found themselves disarmed, immobilized, and face-to-face with humans who had appeared from nowhere. But instead of killing them, the humans did something far more disturbing. They began to teach. "Your tactical formation assumes threats will come from ground level," Mitchell explained conversationally, as if giving a lecture at a military academy. "But humans spent millions of years learning to hunt in 3 dimensions. We're arboreal predators, soldier. We think vertically." One of the captured aliens began to struggle against his bonds, chittering rapidly in his native language. Santos knelt beside him and spoke in perfect hegemony standard tongue, a language she'd learned from listening to prisoner interrogations. "We know you're calling for backup," she said gently. "They'll arrive in approximately 12 minutes, following Route Gamma 3. They'll approach from the southeast because that's the safest path through the debris field. They'll be carrying standard suppression equipment because that's protocol for prisoner extraction scenarios." The alien's struggles ceased as the implications sank in. "You see," Mitchell continued, "while you've been studying our technology, we've been studying something much more important. We've been studying you." The gathering storm. Back in the detention facility, Dr. Cross was wrapping up his interrogation session with results that would have terrified Zelmoth if he'd understood what had really happened. "Thank you for this fascinating discussion, High Inquisitor," Cross said warmly. "I feel like I understand your people so much better now. Your social hierarchy, your decision-making processes, your response patterns to stress, it's all remarkably sophisticated." Zelmoth's mandibles clicked with what might have been satisfaction. "Your cooperation has been illuminating, Dr. Cross. Perhaps your species will integrate more successfully than initially projected." "Oh, I think we'll integrate perfectly," Cross replied, and for just a moment, his smile carried something that made the alien's skin crawl. "We humans are remarkably good at adapting to new environments." As Cross was led back to his cell, he passed groups of human prisoners who were engaged in what appeared to be recreational activities. Card games, exercise routines, informal discussions about their captors' culture. To the hegemony guards, it looked like healthy adjustment to their new circumstances. What they couldn't see was the complex information network that was operating under their noses. Every gesture, every word, every seemingly innocent question was part of a vast intelligence-gathering operation that spanned continents. The ancient memory awakens. That night, as hegemony forces across the globe settled into their routine patrols, something began to change in the human populations under their control. It started as whispers in detention facilities, coded conversations in work details, and subtle shifts in behavior that were almost too small to notice. But Santos, monitoring communications from her hidden position, heard the change immediately. The humans weren't just cooperating anymore. They were coordinating. "Colonel," she whispered into her comm, "you need to hear this." The transmission she'd intercepted was from the Tokyo facility, broadcast on a frequency that shouldn't have been accessible to civilian prisoners. The message was simple: the pack has learned the scent. Time to hunt. Similar messages were being transmitted from detention centers across the globe. London, the watchers have seen enough. Sao Paulo, the students have become teachers. Mumbai, the prey has become the predator. Mitchell felt something ancient and terrible stirring in his chest as he listened to the reports. For the first time in human history, the entire species was acting as a single organism, sharing information and coordinating responses across continents. "My God," he breathed. They've awakened something that we've been trying to suppress for millennia. Sir. They haven't just conquered us, Santos. They've reminded us what we really are. The hegemony had spent weeks studying human technology and human military capabilities. But they'd never studied human evolution. They'd never learned that humans were the only species on Earth that had systematically hunted every other apex predator on the planet. Now, after a week of careful observation and patient learning, humanity was about to remember why they'd been so successful at it. The mask slips. The first strike. General Harrison Blake stood in the abandoned subway tunnel beneath Manhattan, surrounded by equipment that officially didn't exist. The past week of compliance had allowed human engineers to relocate and conceal military assets that the hegemony had assumed were destroyed. Status report, Major, Blake commanded, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. Major David Park consulted his tablet, his expression grim with satisfaction. All teams are in position, sir. We have eyes on 17 primary targets across the continental United States. The hegemony's patrol patterns are completely mapped, and their communication protocols have been cracked. Blake nodded, studying the holographic display that showed hegemony positions across the globe. Red dots indicated confirmed targets, while green lines showed human forces that had been destroyed but were actually repositioned in urban environments, using the aliens' own infrastructure to hide. And the civilian extraction operations? 93% complete, sir. The hegemony believes they're conducting routine prisoner transfers, but we've actually been moving our people into optimal positions for Phase 3. Blake felt a cold satisfaction spread through his chest. The hegemony had been so focused on occupying major cities that they'd completely ignored the vast underground networks that humans had been building for centuries. Subway systems, sewer tunnels, basement connections, an entire hidden world that the aliens couldn't even detect. The revelation. 300 kilometers above the Earth's surface, Warprime Kethval reviewed the morning reports with growing unease. The human integration was proceeding ahead of schedule, but something felt wrong. The efficiency reports, the behavioral analyses, the technical assessments, everything was too perfect. Warprime, his communications officer chittered urgently, were receiving distress signals from Patrol Group 7 in the North American sector. Show me. The holographic display materialized, showing the last known position of a 4-unit patrol. Then, silence. When did we lose contact? 17 minutes ago, sir. They were investigating reported equipment failures in the infrastructure sector when the transmission cut off as another signal arrived. This time, it was from a different patrol group, 2,000 kilometers away. Warprime, this is Patrol Group 12. We found the remains of Patrol Group 7. There, sir, they're arranged in a specific pattern. It appears to be some kind of message. Kethval's mandibles clicked nervously. What kind of message? Sir, the bodies have been positioned to spell out words in our language. The message reads, class dismissed. The humans drop their facade. In detention facilities across the globe, something unprecedented was happening. Human prisoners were standing up, not in panic or rebellion, but with the calm precision of soldiers falling into formation. Dr. Cross walked to the center of his cell block, his demeanor completely transformed. Gone was the helpful, cooperative scientist. In his place stood something that made even the hegemony guards step back instinctively. Guards, Cross announced, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the entire facility, I want to thank you for an extremely educational week. You've taught us everything we need to know about your species, your technology, and your weaknesses. The lead guard raised his weapon, but Cross continued speaking as if he hadn't noticed. You see, you made a fundamental error in your assessment of human psychology. You assumed that because we appeared cooperative, we were actually subjugated. But cooperation and submission are very different things. Around the globe, similar scenes were playing out. In Tokyo, London, Sao Paulo, Mumbai, everywhere the hegemony had established detention facilities, humans were dropping their carefully maintained facades. The coordinated response. General Blake received the confirmation signal he'd been waiting for. Across 6 continents, human forces were simultaneously emerging from hiding. Not the scattered, desperate resistance the hegemony had expected, but a coordinated military response that had been planned down to the minute. "All stations, this is command," Blake spoke into his communicator. "Execute Order 7. I repeat, execute Order 7. The response was immediate and devastating. Hegemony forces that had grown comfortable with their routine patrols suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that knew their every move, had studied their every weakness, and had spent a week positioning assets for maximum impact. In New York, hegemony communication relays that had been accidentally damaged were simultaneously destroyed by charges that had been placed during repair work. In London, supply convoys that had been experiencing random navigation failures were ambushed by forces that had been tracking their movements for days. Major Park watched the tactical display with amazement. "Sir, it's working exactly as planned. They're responding to our attacks with Standard Protocol 7, just like the prisoners predicted they would." Blake smiled grimly. "Of course they are, Major. We've been studying them for a week. We know how they think." The Predator emerges. But the most disturbing development was happening in the detention facilities themselves. The hegemony guards were discovering that their helpless prisoners had been systematically cataloging every aspect of the facility's operations. Dr. Cross stood before a group of increasingly nervous guards, his hands still technically bound but his demeanor radiating confidence. "You know what the real tragedy is? You could have made this work. Humans are remarkably adaptable. If you'd treated us as equals, as partners, we might have genuinely cooperated." One of the guards chittered something in the hegemony language, and Cross responded in perfect, unaccented hegemony standard tongue. "Oh yes, we learned your language. We learned your customs, your military protocols, your psychological profiles. We learned everything." The implications were staggering. While the hegemony had been congratulating themselves on their successful occupation, the humans had been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history. The network reveals itself. Across the globe, the true scope of human preparation was becoming clear. The random equipment failures had been carefully orchestrated to map hegemony repair procedures. The cooperative prisoners had been systematically extracting intelligence from every interaction. The destroyed military assets had been relocated and hidden in plain sight. "War Prime," the communication officer reported, his voice trembling, "we're receiving coordinated attacks across all occupied territories. The humans appear to have complete intelligence on our positions, our patrol routes, our communication frequencies, and our response protocols." Kethval stared at the tactical display in disbelief. The humans weren't just resisting, they were outmaneuvering forces that had conquered nearly 50 worlds. "How is this possible? Our initial assessments indicated primitive technology and minimal coordination capabilities." "Sir," the intelligence officer clicked nervously, "I believe we may have fundamentally misunderstood the human species. They weren't showing us their capabilities during the initial assessment. They were studying us." The Ancient Awakening. In the subway tunnels beneath Manhattan, General Blake felt something stirring in his chest that he recognized from his earliest military training. It was the same feeling that had driven humans to hunt mammoth, to track predators across continents, to systematically eliminate every threat on their home planet. "Major Park," he said quietly, "patch me through to all active units. It's time to remind the galaxy what humans are capable of." The message that went out across the human resistance network was simple: the pack has learned the scent. Now we hunt. For the first time in their history, the hegemony was facing an enemy that had turned their own conquest into a learning opportunity. An enemy that had spent a week pretending to be prey while actually studying how to become the perfect predator. The mask was off. The trap was sprung. And humanity was about to show the galaxy why they were the only species that had ever successfully turned their entire home planet into a hunting ground.